On November 18, 1942, high over Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, an unidentified Japanese Zero pilot gripped his control yoke firmly while observing the unusual twin-boomed U.S. aircraft descending from the airfield. That day, members of the 339th Fighter Squadron achieved a milestone as the initial Lightning operators to engage Japanese planes, an event that undermined Tokyo's long-held beliefs in their command of the skies. Featuring dual engines and twin tails, these machines ascended in a manner unlike anything encountered before, as he subsequently informed his group leader at Rabaul, a statement that hinted at the initial fractures in 3 years of unchallenged Japanese aerial control. Peering through his cockpit glass, he had just seen evidence that challenged every principle ingrained in Japanese carrier-based flying tactics. The American P-38 Lightning fighters, those odd twin-boom designs that Japanese scouts had written off as bulky and awkward, had surged from low altitude to fighting height more swiftly than his Mitsubishi A6M0 could keep pace. Across China, the Philippines, and Pearl Harbor, the Zero had dominated unchallenged. No enemy plane could rival its ascent, speed, or agility. But now, over this war-torn atoll, U.S. aviators in their dual-engine craft were setting the engagement rules from elevations the Zero found difficult to attain. Planes from the 339th Fighter Squadron downed 3 Japanese machines in that inaugural clash, launching strikes from positions where the Zero's famed agility proved irrelevant. The equations of air dominance were shifting, not through revisions in close combat guides, but via the harsh truth of better high-altitude capabilities that would quickly erode every notion Japanese flyers held about their unbeatable status, their planes, and their foes. The fading assurance of the rising sun. The downfall of Japanese sky mastery had started well before that autumn encounter, even if no one in the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service would have accepted it. From December 7, 1941, onward, Japanese carrier pilots had surged through the Pacific, enveloped in an air of unconquerability. The Mitsubishi A6M0, boasting exceptional reach, a sharp turn radius, and skilled operators, had forged a terrifying legacy. Its top velocity of 332 mph at optimal height appeared formidable, and its knack for outturning any opposing fighter rendered it lethal in classic dogfights. Among the top aces stood Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, with numerous kills, a seasoned hand from the Chinese front, and a veteran of endless skirmishes. By 1942, Sakai had notched 13 triumphs in the Borneo operations alone prior to his move to Lae, New Guinea, where he amassed most of his ultimate 64 credited successes. His self-assurance, shared by his comrades, remained unshakable. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, Sakai's direct commander, had briefed his flyers ahead of missions. The U.S. aircraft in the Guadalcanal region likely originated from carriers aiding the landing. They were most likely standard Navy models, not Army types. Japanese aviators anticipated confronting carrier-launched F-4F Wildcats, foes they had bested previously. The opening half of 1942 reinforced Japanese preeminence. Their pilots felled outdated Brewster Buffaloes near Singapore, overwhelmed Curtiss P-40 Warhawks above Java, and brushed off British Hurricanes over Burma. The Zero enjoyed almost total early sway in the Pacific arena. Even against fresher Allied types, Japanese airmen held their mental advantage via advanced preparation and strategies honed through prolonged action in China. Yet by summer 1942, intel reaching Japanese units mentioned a fresh U.S. fighter, an outlier. Dual power plants, dual rudders, robust forward-mounted guns. Such accounts were largely ignored by unit heads. How might a dual-engine plane endanger the agile Zero? Japanese carrier strategy, rooted in fleet-deciding clashes and personal prowess, offered no lens for grasping the impending shift. The arrival of the Lightning. The P-38 Lightning stood as the war's sole truly effective twin-engine daylight interceptor. It stemmed from Lockheed's bid for a February 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps call for an extended-range pursuer. Engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his crew devised an innovative design, a pursuit craft surpassing 400 mph, reaching 40,000 feet and holding fuel for sorties beyond 1,000 miles. The P-38s paired Allison V1710 engines, each yielding 150 horsepower via turbochargers, delivered traits that astonished Japanese designers. Whereas the Zero prioritized utmost agility at lightest possible weight, forgoing even protective plating and self-sealing tanks in initial variants, the Lightning embodied an opposing approach: velocity, elevation prowess, armament punch, and endurance. The debut P-38s reached the Pacific Front without much acclaim. However, it suffered from various mechanical issues. Upon the initial arrival of P-38s in Australia, crews uncovered several design flaws, postponing their entry into battle. Yet by the end of 1942, engineers were ironing out these shortcomings, and seasoned aviators from P-40 units began shifting to the innovative aircraft. Although the 49th Fighter Group continued operating P-40s for the moment, a switch to the Lightning loomed on the horizon. These airmen carried invaluable lessons from intense clashes with Japanese opponents. Through costly experiments, many ending in tragedy, they had grasped the key rule: avoid dogfights involving turns against a Zero. The P-38 offered them the means to dictate the terms of engagement. Initial clash in the Solomons. On November 18, 1942, the Lightning saw its first significant showdown with Japanese planes, as members of the 339th Fighter Squadron, launching from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, intercepted enemy forces while protecting Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. The outcome left participants on both sides reeling. Japanese aviators, providing cover for their own bombers, were the first to notice the odd twin-tailed shapes ascending from the southern direction. At first, they reacted with bewilderment. Could these be scout bombers? Their climbing speed ruled out that idea. Only after identifying them as enemy interceptors did the Japanese realize the P-38s had already secured a 5,000-foot edge in height. The P-38s would circle at elevations beyond the Zero's reliable performance range. Their superior velocity up high enabled them to position themselves ideally. Then, these massive interceptors would dive earthward, crashing into the vulnerable Zero formations. The figures painted a clear picture. Though the Zero excelled in slow-speed turns, a fact etched in legend, its agility at faster paces fell short of the P-38's capabilities above certain heights. Once exceeding 250 mph, the Zero's controls grew progressively stiff. Past 300 mph, maneuvering the plane turned nearly impossible. In contrast, later P-38 variants, featuring hydraulic-assisted controls, stayed responsive during steep descents nearing 500 mph. The innovation gap. The dismay felt by Japanese flyers extended far past raw specs. The P-38 embodied a novel strategy for air battles that the Japanese forces hadn't foreseen. Its weaponry, a cluster of 50-caliber machine guns plus a 20mm cannon, all nose-mounted, unleashed concentrated destruction without the tricky aiming adjustments needed for wing guns. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima faced a tactic that would gain notoriety: a coordinated assault by foes. Two Wildcats pounced on his aircraft. Though he swiftly tailed one adversary, he couldn't squeeze off shots before the partner's Grumman barreled in from the flank. Back at Rabaul, Nakajima fumed over the incident. He'd been compelled to power dive away to survive. Such brushes with Wildcats paled beside the terror the P-38 would unleash. Saburo Sakai, the legendary Japanese ace, would concede later that Zeros could no longer tangle effectively with P-38s unless rare, favorable scenarios arose, which rarely did. This confession from the nation's top scorer hit hard within pilot circles. The strategic situation proved even grimmer than solo encounter tallies indicated. With its 1,600-mile reach using auxiliary fuel tanks, the Lightning could materialize across the expansive Pacific front, shielding bombers on raids into enemy zones or launching patrols distant from U.S. outposts. Japanese aviators lost their edge of greater numbers even in home skies. The Yamamoto Operation, Peak Showcase. No event highlighted the P-38's edge more vividly than Operation Vengeance on April 18, 1943, when 16 P-38s undertook a 435-mile pursuit to down Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The operation demanded exacting navigation. The P-38 Lightning excelled in operations over vast expanses of water. pushing its limits to extreme distances and effectively taking on both heavy bombers and their accompanying fighters. Major John Mitchell commanded the mission, guiding the planes at just 50 feet over the sea surface to evade radar before surging upward to the necessary height for engagement. The blow to Japanese naval air power proved crushing on a mental level. Their highly esteemed commander, accompanied by 6 Zero fighters, had been tracked and eliminated by U.S. aircraft, pushing far beyond normal operational bounds. Kenji Yanaga, a Zero flyer from Yamamoto's protective detail, observed the assault firsthand. His account highlighted the stunned reaction of Japanese aviators to the P-38's prowess. The Lightning aviators materialized out of thin air, carried out their strike with deadly accuracy, and slipped away prior to any meaningful retaliation from the Zero Guardians. The U.S. flyers had timed their rendezvous precisely, showing up right as Yamamoto's group was at its most exposed moment, preparing to touch down. Such meticulous strategy, paired with the P-38's superior handling, showcased strengths that Japan had no hope of rivaling: strategic development and flexibility. Throughout 1943, U.S. aviators honed their methods to exploit the P-38's key strengths. The hit-and-run approach, plunging from high up, unleashing fire, then pulling away to height before foes could counter, turned into routine practice. Japanese aviators felt powerless in the face of these maneuvers. The initial clash in the skies between Japanese forces and the P-38 saw 15 enemy planes downed against a single Lightning loss. Such unbalanced triumphs grew more frequent as American aviators mastered their innovative aircraft. The Japanese experimented with several defenses. They deployed dive flaps to provoke overshoots and attacks. They sought to draw P-38s into close-range, low-level dogfights. They also devised more spread-out formations for earlier detection of threats. Yet none of these proved reliable. The disparity in capabilities remained insurmountable, the manufacturing prowess underlying the superiority. The P-38's edge underscored a broader fact about U.S. production power that Japanese aviators were starting to comprehend. By the conflict's conclusion, more than 10,000 P-38s had rolled off assembly lines in 18 different variants, each embodying ongoing enhancements. Successive versions fixed flaws and boosted merits drawn from battlefield lessons. The P-flight preparation periods shrank from 2 years to under 6 months. Fresh aviators reached frontline outfits with fewer than 200 flying hours. U.S. pilots, on the other hand, reported for duty with 400 to 600 hours under their belts. They had drilled battle scenarios in specialized units, reviewed real combat footage from gun cameras, and logged time on various plane classes. Upon switching to P-38s, they underwent targeted instruction in dual-engine handling and elevated altitude fighting techniques, engineering sophistication, and dependability. The P-38's dual-engine setup offered yet another boon that Japanese aviators hadn't entirely recognized: enhanced endurance. With twin power plants, even badly hit Lightnings could nurse back to base using one engine alone. This sturdiness carried a deep mental weight. Japanese pilots, navigating solo engine machines across endless ocean voids, confronted mortality if power quit. The Zero's impressive reach demanded sacrifices like scant protection and non-armored fuel systems. One stray round in a vital spot spelled flames, or a desperate plunge into waters teeming with sharks. The battle for information. By the latter part of 1943, Japanese recon briefed aviators to steer clear of direct contests with the Lightning, citing its alarming descent velocity, pinpoint shooting, and knack for sudden arrivals. These briefings, shared across Japanese units, showed an expanding awareness of their shortfall. A seized Japanese paper from December 1943 declared, "The P-38 variant must rank as the gravest U.S. threat in the Pacific skies. Its velocity and ascent rates surpass all our options. Confrontations ought to be shunned except in cases of decided numerical dominance." The revelation of the P-38's marked superiority and tactical edge marked a profound shift. This acknowledgement that Japanese aviators ought to evade clashes with U.S. fighters signaled a total abandonment of the Bushido principles that had long shaped Japan's carrier-based air forces. The mental toll proved crushing. Airmen raised to pursue battles relentlessly were suddenly instructed to flee the foe. The top performers underscore this shift. The rise of U.S. P-38 experts offered clear proof of the plane's dominance. Major Richard I Bong emerged as the nation's leading ace, tallying 40 kills, everyone in a P-38. Major Thomas B. McGuire notched 38 triumphs prior to his death in January 1945. These feats, racked up in under 2 years of fighting, outstripped the achievements of most Japanese aces over 3 or 4 years of conflict. More than 1,800 Japanese planes succumbed to P-38s across the Pacific campaign. This count signified not merely machines downed, but seasoned aviators gone forever, irreplaceable losses for Japan. Every downed enemy further eroded Japanese aerial strength as their flight schools labored to generate even minimally skilled successors. Advancements persisted. Through 1944, the P-38 kept advancing amid Japanese design stagnation. The P-38L variant boasted enhanced engines, delivering greater thrust at high elevations, better heat management, and provisions for rockets in close support roles. Such planes could haul heavy ordnance alongside their core guns. Japanese flyers, observing the P-38's shift from dogfighting to ruthless strikes on ground targets, understood they confronted not only a better interceptor, but a multifaceted platform of extraordinary adaptability. The mindset upheaval. Apart from raw technical edges, Japanese aviators grappled with grasping the U.S. style of sky warfare. They had romanticized dogfights as a noble pursuit, prizing personal flair and indomitable resolve. Americans viewed it as a technical puzzle, tackled through advanced gear and strategic maneuvers. Commander Masatake Okumiya, an analyst of battle dispatches, reflected post-war, "After the war, we could not accept that fighting spirit alone was insufficient. Every report of P-38 superiority was met with demands for greater dedication, more aggressive spirit. We confused courage with capability." This ingrained mindset blocked any real adjustment. As U.S. pilots honed their methods from real engagements, Japanese instruction clung to flashy maneuvers and solo duels, talents rendered pointless against adversaries who declined to play by those rules. The night fighting breakthrough. Come mid-1944, select P-38s gained basic onboard radar for nocturnal intercepts. Japan lacked any means to rival or neutralize this edge. Twilight had once shielded their missions. Now, obscurity afforded no refuge. The slaughter in the Marianas. Though the P-38 sat out the June 1944 clash in the Philippine Sea, its influence lingered in the depleted ranks of Japanese pilots, pitted against Navy F-SCAFs. Prolonged grinding losses to P-38s and fellow U.S. pursuits had purged Japan's veteran cadre. The infamous Marianas Turkey Shoot, during which U.S. aviators bagged over 300 enemy craft with scant casualties, capped a decline hastened by the P-38. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, leading the Imperial Carrier Fleet, conceded later, "Our pilots were not ready. They had neither the experience nor the aircraft to match the Americans. The war in the air had been lost long before that day." Last-ditch measures and futile efforts. As 1944 gave way to 1945, Japan's bids to offset the P-38 grew frantic. They toyed with deliberate collisions, admitting standard fights were futile. Special incendiary rounds aimed at the P-38's tanks entered trials. Efforts even extended to crafting twin-engined interceptors, yet few saw combat in quantity. The Kawasaki Ki-1002, their stab at a P-38 pier, highlighted the chasm. Operational from 1941 onward, the P-38 outpaced this latecomer, which arrived in 1945 with just 238 units produced. It lagged in speed, ascent rate, and reliability due to persistent power plant woes. The collapse of aerial control. Early in 1945, Japanese airmen abandoned talk of dominance or parity in the skies. They focused on mere endurance. The P-38, teamed with other U.S. fighters, secured utter command over Japanese domains. Saburo Sakai would recall how the P-38 shattered the spirit of Zero pilots. The data paints the picture. P-38 exploits in the Pacific revealed total mastery. Over 1,800 Japanese planes felled by P-38s. Major Richard Bong's 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas Maguire's 38 P-38 kills. P-38 aviators credited with downing more Japanese planes than any other U.S. Army Air Force's interceptor. In contrast, the casualty figures for Japanese aviators painted a far more somber picture. At the conclusion of the conflict, Japan had suffered the loss of more than 90% of its seasoned airmen who entered the war. The typical Japanese flyer in 1945 possessed under 100 hours of flying experience. Rather than fighters, they served as expendable offerings thrust toward a foe they stood no chance of overcoming. Revelations from the post-war era. Following Japan's capitulation, U.S. occupation authorities carried out in-depth discussions with remaining Japanese aviators and leaders. These sessions uncovered the profound mental toll exacted by the P-38. Commander Masatake Okumiya confessed, "The P-38 shattered our assurance entirely. We had trusted in our dominance, in our planes, in our preparation. The lightning demonstrated that we were mistaken on every count. It wasn't merely quicker or more heavily equipped. It embodied a form of warfare we were unable to rival." A Japanese aviator questioned in these talks remarked, "During my initial encounter with the P-38, I was stunned to discover a U.S. plane that could surpass, outmaneuver upward, and dive faster than the Zero, which we regarded as the finest fighter aircraft globally." The engineering evaluation. After the war, detailed engineering reviews exposed the true magnitude of the capability disparity. Mitsubishi A6M0 top velocity 332 mph at optimal height, operational ceiling 33,000 ft, faltering beyond 25,000 ft, ascent speed 300 ft per minute, dropping off sharply at higher elevations, distance 1,930 minutes, remarkable for its era. Weapons: 2 7.7mm machine guns, 2 20mm cannons, restricted ammo supplies. Protection: absent in initial variants, leak-proof fuel reservoirs, missing in initial variants. Lockheed P-38L, lightning top velocity exceeding 400 mph, operational ceiling 44,000 ft, ascent speed 4,750 ft per minute at ground level, distance 1,600 mm with auxiliary tanks. Weapons: 50 caliber machine guns, 20mm cannon, robust shielding for the pilot, leak-proof fuel reservoirs as standard. The figures highlighted an utter imbalance. The Zero was crafted for a distinct type of battle, one relying on personal prowess and agility to secure wins. The P-38 embodied the era of mass production combat, where innovation, output volume, and methodical advancements decided the results. The manufacturing backdrop. The P-38's edge mirrored America's overwhelming industrial strength, which overshadowed Japan's output. Lockheed manufactured more than 10,000 P-38s over the course of the war. Japan built roughly 10,000 Zeros in total, yet across the extended timeline, and with quality deteriorating as hostilities continued. U.S. fabrication processes, drawing on streamlined assembly lines honed in the auto sector, allowed for quicker P-38 production than Japan could prepare its aviators. Every P-38 integrated countless precision-engineered parts, showcasing the seamless U.S. industrial collaboration that Japan failed to duplicate. The Allison power plants driving the P-38 stood as engineering triumphs, featuring forced induction systems, exacting production standards, and alloy expertise surpassing Japanese limits. Whereas Japanese motors demanded laborious manual tuning and calibration, U.S. motors proved nearly plug-and-play, easing upkeep and boosting dependability. The preparation divide. By 1944, the difference in aviator preparation had widened into an abyss. U.S. P-38 operators underwent targeted dual-engine instruction, encompassing over 100 hours on multi-motor simulators prior to handling a P-38. Protocols for engine failure and handling uneven propulsion. Lessons in elevated altitude biology and oxygen apparatus operation. Marksmanship drills with simulated firearms and drag targets. Group flight strategies and collaborative defense methods. Survival and avoidance drills. Thorough understanding of plane mechanisms. Japanese preparation by 1944 involved rudimentary aerial basics, 50 to 100 hours, scant instruction in battle maneuvers, restricted shooting exercises due to ammo shortages, absent dedicated high-elevation drills, focus on morale rather than strategic principles, readiness for one-way assault kamikaze operations. The outcome was foreseeable. U.S. aviators reached combat zones as expert practitioners. Japanese aviators reached them as scarcely capable offerings, strategic shifts. The P-38 compelled sweeping alterations in sky combat approaches. The classic circling melee, prevalent in air battles since World War I, grew outdated. Although the P-38 couldn't outcircle the A-6M0 at speeds under 200 miles, its greater velocity combined with solid ascent capability enabled effective power management strategies. U.S. aviators devised the elevated angle attack, descending from higher positions in the rear, plunging through adversary groups with firepower unleashed, then surging upward to height before opponents could respond. This method, unfeasible absent the P-38's superior traits, nullified Japanese protective groupings. The Japanese sought to adjust by positioning interceptors at various levels, but this scattered their assets and hindered unity. They experimented with mist for hiding, but the P-38's aircraft's speed enabled it to traverse enormous distances rapidly, locating Japanese planes no matter where they attempted to conceal themselves. The element of psychological intimidation, the P-38's striking configuration, served as a mental deterrent. Its dual-boom structure appeared otherworldly to Japanese aviators, who at first regarded it as cumbersome and unwieldy. Yet this unusual outline evolved into an emblem of U.S. engineering dominance, instilling dread in Japanese flyers well before any engagement began. Base personnel noted that even whispers of P-38 presence nearby would prompt Japanese aviators to postpone sorties or demand extra protection. Among Japanese pilots, the plane earned the moniker "Two Planes, One Pilot," capturing their bewilderment at its form alongside admiration for its prowess. Broader strategic consequences. The P-38's edge extended far beyond direct aerial clashes, reshaping Japanese military strategy. Enemy leaders had banked on near-equal aerial footing to let their vaunted fighting spirit carry the day. The P-38 proved that advanced tech could deliver such decisive superiority that resolve alone meant little. This awareness shaped Japanese choices, spurring the hastened adoption of kamikaze assaults as standard dogfights grew untenable, pulling back seasoned pilots for defense of the homeland, halting aggressive aerial efforts by the middle of 1944, redirecting funds to frantic miracle weapon initiatives, and accepting that victory through orthodox methods lay out of reach. Admiral Soemu Toyota, head of the combined fleet, confessed privately in October 1944. Our Air Force can no longer conduct regular missions. U.S. interceptors, particularly the P-38, have stripped us of any claim to the heavens. Triumph in upkeep and supply chains. Early worries about the P-38's dual-engine intricacy troubled U.S. strategists, yet it highlighted yet another edge for America. Refined servicing and supply systems. P-38 units achieved readiness levels above 80% despite harsh Pacific environments. By contrast, Japanese squadrons with easier single-engine designs could scarcely hit 50% operational status in 1944. U.S. ground teams, often drawn from commercial flying and car sectors, applied methodical techniques to plane care. They crafted custom implements, uniform protocols, and routine check regimens. Japanese upkeep stayed rooted in old ways, depending on personal expertise over organized methods. The disparity in guidance systems. Fitted with radio compass gear, P-38s could chart courses reliably across expansive Pacific expanses. They locked onto signal towers, pinpointed home fields amid foul conditions, and executed spot-on timed strikes. Japanese aviators mostly stuck to estimated positioning and site-based piloting, curbing their maneuverability. This edge in orientation proved vital for extended flights. The operation to down Yamamoto demanded exact routing over 435 miles of empty sea, hitting the precise spot right on schedule. With their tech, Japanese flyers couldn't pull off anything like it. Effects on Japanese carrier forces. The Imperial Japanese Navy's whole approach hinged on shipboard flying. The P-38's command demolished that pillar. Post-Midway, rebuilt carrier wings got shredded by P-38s alongside other U.S. pursuits in island assaults. Come 1944, Japanese flat tops deployed with depleted squadrons of inexperienced hands. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, leading the first mobile fleet, warned ahead of the Philippine Sea Clash, "Our aviators aren't prepared to face U.S. interceptors. They can hardly touch down on decks, let alone tangle with P-38s and Hellcats. We're dooming them outright." Shift in mindset. Clashing with the P-38 compelled a deep overhaul in Japanese armed forces philosophy. The Bushido ethos, stressing inner fortitude and solo combat skill, fell short against America's factory-driven might. Rising Japanese commanders started challenging the core of their service principles. This shift rippled past the ranks. Rare surviving pilots who made it back shared tales of U.S. tech mastery that clashed with decades of indoctrination on Western weakness and Japanese soulful edge. The fiscal truth. The P-38 initiative embodied a financial outlay Japan simply couldn't rival. A single P-38 ran about 97,000 in 1944. Costly, sure, but America churned out thousands. Japan labored to build even cheaper planes in substantial quantities. The aluminum for one P-38 outstripped monthly allotments to many enemy factories by 1944. The exact gauges, the turbochargers, the variable pitch blades, every part showcased production strengths Japan had never attained. The testimony from pilots stands as the strongest proof of the P-38's profound effect. Even Japanese aviators, conditioned to avoid confessing vulnerabilities, consistently recognized the lightning's edge during after-war discussions. Take Lieutenant Saburo Sakai's account. The P-38 operated at heights beyond the Zero's reach. Its exceptional velocity in the upper atmosphere enabled it to position itself ideally for attacks. From there, these massive planes would dive earthward, overwhelming the vulnerable Zero squadrons, the supreme indignity. Yet, the deepest embarrassment might not stem from battlefield defeats alone, but from the P-38's additional roles. Variants dedicated to reconnaissance captured about 90% of the aerial images across the Pacific campaign. Enemy sights, troop shifts, and buildups faced unrelenting surveillance. The very planes that outmatched them in dogfights were charting their downfall with precision. Commanders in Japan understood that their actions were under constant scrutiny, captured on film, and dissected. The P-38 F-5, configured for photography without armaments, yet with undiminished speed, snapped pictures of Japanese facilities without fear. Interceptors dispatched to challenge them failed to climb high enough. The enduring jolt. The dismay felt by Japanese flyers upon meeting the P-38 lingered well after the conflict ended. It shaped Japan's aviation progress, tactical strategies, and views on progress versus heritage in the post-war era. Numerous pilots who survived turned into champions for embracing new tech in rebuilding Japan. They discovered through bitter experience that bravery alone, devoid of tools, held no value. Such encounters spurred the nation's post-war commitment to innovation and manufacturing prowess. Saburo Sakai, who thrived as an entrepreneur post-war, frequently reflected on insights gained from clashing with the P-38. The lightning revealed that we could no longer afford to lag in tech. It proved that manufacturing strength, rather than martial fervor, seals triumph in contemporary conflicts, the drive for engineering advances. Throughout the war, the P-38's refinements highlighted U.S. strengths in swift upgrades. Issues spotted in action prompted fast fixes in subsequent builds. Dive recovery problems birthed dive flaps. Freezing cabins spurred better climate controls. Gripes about turning speed resulted in powered ailerons. In contrast, Japan's plane upgrades suffered from scarce materials and bureaucratic stiffness, unable to keep up. The Zero in 1945 combat resembled the Pearl Harbor Raider of 1941, with only tweaks. By 1945, the P-38L far outclassed the 1942 P-38E, the concluding evaluation. General Kenny, who led Allied air operations in the Southwest Pacific, once remarked, The P-38 pilots flying at great height chose when and where they wanted to fight, with disastrous results for Japanese pilots. This power to control fight conditions marked a breakthrough in aerial warfare that Japan's strategies never overcame. The numbers tell an irrefutable story. At the war's close, America's leading two aces had downed 78 Japanese planes combined, everyone in P-38s. Japan's highest-scoring surviving ace tallied 64 kills over 6 years. Such losses proved too draining for Japan to sustain. The wider ramifications. Beyond mere tech dominance, the P-38's command over the Zero exposed core contrasts in warfare philosophy, production might, inventive spirit, societal norms, and planning. Japan geared up for a brief knockout campaign where resolve would offset shortages. The P-38 embodied U.S. readiness for prolonged mechanized struggle, where ingenuity and output would decide outcomes. The mental blow to Japanese airmen facing the P-38 was, at heart, a confrontation with the modern age. The Lightning embodied the methodical fusion of research, design, and factory efficiency in battle. Set against that, the Honorable Bushido Code stood powerless. The toll on lives. Beneath the data and specs hid profound sorrow. Countless young Japanese aviators, often with under 100 hours aloft, launched against P-38s in outdated machines. They grasped their slim odds. Post-war found letters from home showed youths accepting their fate. One fledgling pilot penned prior to his last sortie, "Mother, I will confront the twin-tailed demons tomorrow. Return seems unlikely. They soar beyond our dreams in height and pace. Duty calls me, yet hope fades." P-38s claimed him over Rabaul in March 1944. His tale echoed thousands more. Youthful existences offered up to a chasm in tech that valor alone couldn't span. The enduring effects. The P-38's influence reached past World War II. It guided Cold War plane designs for both the United States and the Soviet Union, drew on insights from the P-38 Lightning to design dual-engine interceptors capable of high-altitude operations. The idea of leveraging tech for decisive superiority became a cornerstone of U.S. military strategy. In Japan's case, this ordeal shaped their post-war defense strategy, emphasizing superior tech and elite forces rather than sheer numbers or widespread conscription. The sting of tech disparity left deep scars on Japanese strategic mindset. Wrapping up, the close of a chapter. The dismay felt by Japanese aviators, unable to match the P-38 Lightning's speed or ascent, signaled the demise of an old guard in air battles. The era of the lone ace, where bravery and talent alone clinched triumphs, perished amid Pacific skies. It gave way to industrialized combat, where engineering prowess, manufacturing scale, and methodical progress dictated results. Saburo Sakai's after-war musings on how the P-38 crushed the spirit of Zero pilots summed up this seismic shift. The edge wasn't merely in velocity or vertical performance, it symbolized a combat paradigm Japan simply couldn't rival. Those Japanese flyers who made it through absorbed a brutal truth. In contemporary conflict, valor sans advanced tools spells not glory, but pointlessness. Beyond downing enemy planes, the P-38 demolished a whole philosophy of battle, dignity, and state strength. Their stunned realization echoed the jolt of realizing core assumptions about dogfighting were flawed. The Zero, untouchable in 1941, turned out dated by 1943. Aces honed for years in twisting maneuvers discovered their expertise irrelevant against foes who dodged such scraps altogether. Ultimately, the fork-tail fiend that plagued Japanese airmen's dreams stood for far more than an elite warbird. It personified U.S. manufacturing muscle, inventive breakthroughs, and organized war-making that would shape the latter 20th century. The final say goes to Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace, who outlasted the conflict and pondered its takeaways. The P-38 drove home our toughest insight. The samurai epic had ended. Over the Pacific, we confronted tomorrow, and it overwhelmed us. That collision's echo persists, underscoring how, in war's forge, tech and production power prevail over heritage and personal daring. Japanese aviators, bested by the P-38 Lightning in speed and climb, paid with their lives, machines, and their nation's visions of supremacy. They pitted samurai resolve against democracy's forge. The P-38 Lightning served as the reply, unleashed at 400 miles per hour from 30,000 feet, with lethal accuracy no bravery could deflect.